Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Unpacking the Bias Inside Us virtual event hosted by Discovery Place Science and the Levine Museum of New South. My name is Gabor Jupan. I'm with Discovery Place Science, and we are so thrilled to have you with us today to hear from two incredibly brilliant people, Marquette Folly from the Smithsonian and Dr. Lenora Crabtree of UNC Charlotte. The Bias Inside Us exhibition from the Smithsonian is currently at Discovery Place Science through April 9th. And if you have not yet had a chance to see it, we hope that you will come by and see it during museum hours or free of charge during our community access evenings on Thursdays between 5:30 and 8:30 p.m. More information can be found on the Discovery Place Science website, science.discoveryplace.org. As a brief introduction of our guests today, S. Marquette Folly is a social and cultural historian, exhibition developer, and project manager. She came to the Smithsonian Institution in 1983 as a fellow to work on the seminal National Museum of American History exhibition, Field to Factory, Afro-American Migration, 1915 to 1940. Folly joined the curatorial staff in the musical division of the museum and worked to broaden the jazz holdings of the museum. Currently, she is content director at the Smithsonian Institution Traveling Exhibition Service, SITES, and played a central role in the development of The Bias Inside Us. Dr. Lenora Crabtree is a former teacher, currently teacher educator, education researcher, and curriculum designer, whose endeavors reflect her conviction that scientific inquiry grounded in history and place provides a powerful lens through which co-learners can recognize and disrupt inequitable systems. Her published research includes a study of the gifted gap in one school district and its impact on access to STEM education and ultimately economic mobility. Those of you in our audience, we encourage you to add questions of your own in the comments, which we will share with our speakers to respond to. Since our time today is limited, we will simply turn it over the conversation to our guests momentarily. Dr. Crabtree and Ms. Folly have graciously given me permission to use their first name during our conversation today. With that, I will turn it over to Marquette to kick us off. Marquette, what is the goal of this exhibition? What are you hoping to unlock with this experience?
The fact that we are all human. And bias is part of being human. In a time when bias is so much a knee-jerk, hot button word, the Smithsonian just wanted to give us a chance to say, let's stop, let's see, let's understand. We have bias, it's natural. The problem is, what do we do when the bias allows us to be unkind, violent, distorted in the way we look at the world? So our hope is that we allow people to understand that bias is not destiny, that we're all human, and we can work toward uncoupling that part of bias that allows us to be not our best selves.
Marquette, I really appreciate that, because in my work with teachers and persons training to be teachers, I find sometimes that their first reaction is to say, well, I just don't want to see difference. Like, I don't see difference. I'm just going to treat everyone the same, right? But I think the exhibit helps us to understand that that's really not possible, that we all do have these different biases. Can you talk a little bit about kind of what we learned through the exhibit about how some of those develop? Why do we have biases? Why does that even exist?
You know, Lenora, I love you saying that, using that phrase, I don't see differences. What's very exciting for me is to allow ourselves to see differences and be enthralled with them, moved by that, engaged by them. The exhibition simply, actually, there's a poem. We love using poetry, and the exhibition wants to use poetry and art and good imagery to just say, what do you do with a difference? Do you stand and discuss it? Do you rail against it? Or do you allow it to be? This exhibition, hopefully, in a very kind way, engaging way, says you can actually stop certain things. You can hear people and even your own words that might be resulting in a microaggression. The exhibition allows that to be defined, and then allows that word, that action, to be opened up to just give us room as humans to figure out what we can and what we cannot do. So the exhibition allows us to also say, they're mind bugs. So there are these wonderful hands-on interactives that will just trick your mind, your eye. You think that shapes are the same size or not the same size, and the exhibition shows you it's just a mind bug. The exhibition allows you to accept the fact that because we're human, this idea of bias is natural. We're born with a natural inclination. We were born to humans who fed us, who clothed us, who loved us. Why wouldn't we be more interested in being with them? That's okay. The exhibition just simply says, if we allow our natural biases not inform us in terms of our goodness and those goodnesses, but allow us to stereotype and close different people off, we close ourselves off from an expanded opportunity to learn more, to glean more because of diverse groups of people. And I still think the exhibition does it in an engaging, interesting way. I'm not sure whether you saw the exhibition, Lenore. What do you think we did okay with that?
Yes, very much. I love how the exhibition weaves in the science, right? Understanding even like the parts of the brain and how they respond to difference. But then helping us also see both that difference, that recognition of difference is natural. And there is a bias that's going to play in, as you said, because of childhood and experiences we've had. But that can become harmful, right? That those can create systems and structures that advantage or disadvantage. And then thinking about how do we respond there, right? How do we interrupt that? I've really appreciated opportunities in working with teachers for us to think about, and with students, what did I see as I drove around in different communities, right, as a child? Or what did I experience in hallways and classrooms? Who was in what classes, right? What labels were on those classes, and how that actually created what I think, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, can be some harmful forms of bias of who has, who should be granted opportunities in certain areas. I know for me as a teacher, I had to become honest, right, about the way that I was allowing biases to potentially affect the way I view students. And then how could I interrupt those? And one of the things I'm hearing you saying, it's really in those very diverse settings that we can learn a tremendous amount that helps to interrupt those, right? So I'd love to hear, what do you think? What are some ways you think the exhibit, but also from your own personal experiences, when we do, move past that, I just don't see difference, right? When we move to saying, okay, I do have these biases, and I live in a society that has both informed them, but also reinforced them. How then can I interrupt those?
With sight, with acknowledging the fact that biases exist and that power and privilege allow certain biases to be inculcated and shape the way we think about most of our world. With understanding that you can go through a neighborhood and you can think that neighborhood and the people who live there are demarcated or defined by that neighborhood, not ever remembering or understanding that the neighborhood may not have always looked like that, and that the people there are just a sliver of people who may look the same way but don't live like that. If we can allow ourselves to have the muscle to think freely, that's what we can do. And this exhibition keeps going at that in, I think, very inventive ways. How to unpack that, how to uncouple that which distorts our vision. For instance, too often, poverty is always aligned with people who are brown or Black. There's white poverty. Too often, privilege is always considered just something that white people have, where Black people who are powerful and rich have privilege also. We can allow ourselves to uncouple, to see, to hear. We become a better society. We become more capable of having a richer life because we haven't closed ourselves off to just those familiar opportunities, those familiar journeys, those familiar people. And it doesn't mean that you're going to enjoy everything if you diversify what you do. It does mean, though, that you give yourself the opportunity to grow. And so I think that in this exhibition, we actually do meet people. The exhibition purposefully has videos that are talking directly at you. They're positioned at eye level. So there's human to human. The exhibition looks, I love that you brought up a classroom. There's this wonderful, evocative video that shows this lovely little man, little student, who for various reasons that I'm not quite clear about is labeled as a troublemaker, and it stays with him. And then it progresses through his growing up so that he becomes an outsider. And what's interesting about this video is he's not the only one. So what a teacher believes and what a teacher allows, how a teacher looks at an individual child can be so determined about who that child will be when they're an adult. So the idea that you are welcoming an ability to open your eyes, to think more freely, to see more freely, to see more broadly, I applaud that. And that is what the exhibition truly wants to inculcate. We can all do this. We're human. We are human. Another favorite, if I can bore you for a minute, another favorite piece I like about the exhibition is that it opens with these skeletons in a light box, just simply saying beyond all of this stuff, we're all human inside. This exhibition wants to say that over and over again. And the science of bias is that we're born that way naturally. We don't have to let it trap us.
I really appreciate that video as well. And I was excited to find out that when I looked, both I was, at the exhibit in Discovery Place, but then I looked at it, the online version, that I could actually access those resources. Because I think as a teacher, that would be a really powerful thing for me to use in a classroom, or even if we have folks that are joining us that would like to find ways to have conversations. I think one of the reasons Discovery Place brought this exhibit was to start a conversation, right? The exhibit isn't a be all and end all, right? That we are, and I think in Charlotte, joining a conversation that has been ongoing of how do we disrupt? Because, you and I've kind of been talking up to this point about individual biases, but something I have seen in schools over and over, and I know we see in neighborhoods and other places, that individual biases often can become and over time create systems and structures. And so I'd love for us to think a little bit about, as an individual, I can try to interrupt these biases. I can open myself up, as you've been encouraging us to these greater learning opportunities. I can use that muscle and work that muscle. But how then do I potentially be a part of enacting change against systemic biases, right? Where we see systems that are actually in place. I've heard some helpful analogies or metaphors for that. It's like I've bought a house and I'm in that house, right? And the kitchen's here and the living room's here and the bedrooms are here. And whether I like it or not, there's certain ways I've got to move and work to get from place to place. And that's somewhat of the systems we exist in, right? We may have recognized and seen the harm, but now we exist in the system. So can we just kind of unpack that a little bit? How do we as individuals work against these systems? How do you think the exhibit informs us there?
I like your question a lot, and I'd like to unpack it a little bit because it's a wonderfully rich question. The exhibition shows us that humans create everything around us, from designing a building with wheelchair accessibility or not, for choosing an image of beauty that doesn't allow someone who is more full-bodied to be considered beautiful or not, where we look at what's considered a good religion compared to one that's a little not as good. All around us, you'll find these moments where basis for what is considered good are coming very often from a biased position, where the center of power in our society registers itself as the moniker of the gauge of what is appropriate, what is good. So if we allow ourselves to know that, as you mentioned, systemically, it is part of our very environment. We allow ourselves that kind of vision, then we just allow ourselves then to say, well, is that appropriate? Are there other options for beauty? Should a building be able to be accessible for anybody who wants to get into a building? What is the ability to see something if you can't see very well, if you need glasses? All of those moments around us, you can see things that block us from being the best we can be, or center us to have no problems, but everybody else who's not like me has the problem. We can see that. We can accept that. If we can accept the fact that being empathetic, and I'll use that word rather loosely, we can use ourselves, if we can see ourselves being like the other, then allowing that kind of humanity, that kind of ability to see that we are more alike than not, allows us to, at various moments, small and large, to start to unpack those biases that get in our way from being a better person. Is that helpful?
That is really helpful. And I'm also thinking about, you prompted me to think about a part of the exhibit about microaggressions, right? I love that the exhibit helps me unpack two things that I'd heard a lot about: stereotype threat and microaggressions, right? These kind of concepts from the social sciences that have entered kind of our I think, national conversation, but may not be well understood. And I really appreciated the opportunity to think about, am I an ally, right? Or just a bystander when I'm in a situation where microaggressions are occurring? I think I had always kind of looked at microaggressions as, oh my gosh, am I committing them? And I'd focus there. And I love this idea of, okay, I may be in a setting. Of course, I need to be aware of that. I also need to be aware of, when am I in a situation where I have an opportunity to interrupt or support for someone who's being marginalized by microaggressions. I really appreciated that. And I also think that as we do accept the humanity of all, and that these various things that our personal histories and our collective histories may have become more dangerous biases, that we can also think about what are some of the ways we can engage in even policy change, right? How can we, in that allyship, right? I know working in schools, one of the important things has been to first help people to see the structures that were disenfranchising students, right? But then, okay, once we see them and we become aware that these disparities they are not natural disparities, right? The disparate rates of access, and as you pointed out, discipline, they're not natural, right? They were constructed. That tells me that I can do something to deconstruct them.
Yes, yes. I love that. And I want to add to paint the magic and the potency of what you just described, Lenora, in terms of understanding microaggressions. Then the exhibition, that scenario is done with a video that is animated, where you get a chance to make choices. Nothing's right, nothing's wrong. Well, there is more right than wrong, but you're not condemned for a choice you make. But these are animated, a coffee club, teenagers just being. Microaggressions, you can deal with, what should I be? And I love your word, am I an ally or am I not? The exhibition really wants people not to be thinking that a finger is going to point at you. It purposefully doesn't do that. The exhibition stands at a point of view that, again, we all have biases. It comes in various iterations. So there are these engaging moments of interactivity that allows you just to see, and ultimately just to hear. There's a conversation between two talented people who deal with bias all the time. They're talking with us, to us. And so ultimately, we can find a way to be the person we want to be. If I want to uncouple it, you can. If you want to see where it is indeed hurtful to other people, you will. But the exhibition purposefully doesn't condemn. It simply wants to open our eyes, open our hearts, and hopefully you have some fun along the way.
Mm-hmm. I love this way we keep coming back and forth to seeing and embracing difference.
I do too. I think it's important.
But and just this beauty and learning from it and celebrating it.
Yes.
Right. Knowing that it can be negative. What we do with that can become harmful. Acknowledging that, but then when we do disrupt it, right? I've been in situations where I was in one of those classrooms with that higher level honors or AP, whatever you want to call it, that was extremely diverse, and saw what can happen in that space. The learning that can occur when we've broken down those barriers, right? And that's what really excites me about this type of exhibit.
That's exciting. Just hearing you describe the joy of seeing the magic of us, our diverse selves in action together. It was exciting to hear that and to feel that. It is indeed a potency about the exhibition. Though I love the skeletons, there is a video that the Ad Council created that has this wonderful array of different people. First, you see them as skeleton, they come from behind the screen, and the diversity and richness and freshness of our amazing landscape of humanity is there. This exhibition really, really always wants to help you see that. It is visually interesting. It is not a preachy affair. It is done with, as you would have seen, with a sense of light and wit and magic and life. It's not musty. It's not dusty. It simply wants to say over and over again, we don't have to be relegated to be negative because it's a bias that's around. We can unhook it. We can unclench it. I went through the exhibition and most recently at Charlotte, at Discovery Place. It was very exciting. Lots of people were there. It's very nice. But there's this wonderful artwork created by a photographer called Pantone. And it's just not the regular Pantone. It uses people's skin color. I was walking through there and there was a family. They were comparing what their skin tone was. I hadn't thought ever of doing that. And it was so fun. It was just so fun. And again, a diversity of the differences that are us. The exhibition allows us to see that.
Yes, and I saw that same thing in with the skeletons, particularly of seeing what appeared to be both an imam and a Jewish rabbi coming from behind that screen, right? And just that celebration and really, really exciting. I'm wondering if we may have some questions that we've been asked to address. And so if there are those that, I know we've got some folks behind the scenes helping us to find those. Oh, and that looks like a great one for you, Marquette. Annie asking, have you had to modify any changes to the exhibit over time?
We were very lucky. First, for the initial collaboration with Tolerance in Motion, who came to the Smithsonian, and then around the table were groups of people who are doing this work in various ways. And so initially, the exhibition was named, we used the word tolerance, and then these wonderful people said the word tolerance suggests that someone or some group has to tolerate another group. And so we then changed. We changed that to bias, which again is this hot button word, but at the core of so many of our isms, ableism, racism, ageism, come from a bias. And so unpacking that was the initial change, but making that change from tolerance to bias opened up the world to us. We want to just do a very simple thing. Bias is inside of every human. Bias is science. We can unpack that. Are there any other questions?
They're asking about how the exhibition covers, as you were just saying. So how did you work to make sure you were covering all of those?
Well, again, with sight and with a really wonderful team and the thinking, we really are, as a whole, committed to being as right as possible. And so we just simply covered it. And so there are these visual, for instance, in terms of body shape and what's beautiful, there's this wonderful woman doing an amazing yoga pose. And she is considered by most people overweight, but the beauty of her and the muscularity of her is amazing. We have visuals that will allow you to encounter a place where a wheelchair or any other body able problem is being confronted. We deal with that, and then also we bring up regionalism and other aspects of that, but always we do it hopefully not in a pedantic way. We do it in an engaging, different, interesting way. So there's never one voice that is the way these topics are dealt with and shown and unpacked and illuminated. We have not only the animation I mentioned on microaggressions, we have these wonderfully designed first-person conversations that end with biases around us in these different scenarios, not long, but different scenarios, different people, videos in around that talk to the audience member. Then there are these wonderful interactive tests, games that get at bias. And again, artworks, poetry, good language. The design is really, I think, really very evocative and engaging. So we find various ways to get at it. But starting from the point of view that these isms need to be talked about, these isms need to be shown as deriving from a place where bias is allowed to become negative as opposed to becoming and staying positive.
Yeah, I appreciate very much in the video, in the animation you were talking about, the different ways they address gender, as well as sexual orientation. And I thought that was extremely helpful. The science on human bias, the evolution of that. How has that changed through our history?
How would you answer that, Lenora?
Well, I would start, and this really addresses just something that's been very helpful for me to learn as a scientist, is that science actually has a history of creating and reinforcing biases. And that's something that I was not aware of. I wasn't taught that in my science classrooms. But it has actually been a big thing, a big part of my own evolution as a teacher educator, in that I believe that what the field that I deeply relate to, which my first degree is in molecular biology, what we help to create, I have to help dismantle. But I believe that while science was really used to harm in the 17th and 18th century, that we are seeing changes there, but we're not where we need to be. The field of science has a long way to go. One of the ways we will greatly grow as a society is when we have more diverse scientists and diversity in all different ways that we've been talking about, right? Because different people do bring these experiences and ideas. And I know we're short on time, but if anyone wants some examples, we can share those, because the ideas that the first persons who do come from marginalized situations bring to the table often advance science in very powerful ways. And when they're ignored, we pay a price.
Well said. Well said.
Wow, I really appreciate that question, Cliff. I heard a teacher actually in the exhibit a couple of weeks ago with a group of students. So how would you address that, Marquette?
Well, I was going to jump in there, but why don't you lead on that one? I'm intrigued with your response. Do you mind? I don't mind going
No,
first, but I would love to hear you.
I will say it's a difficult situation. I really hear and feel, particularly parents struggle, because we know that children do see differences, but they often have not yet picked up on society's way, right? So they just see differences, but harmful bias is learned. Do you think the science supports that, Marquette?
I think you're right, and I love us. I love the fact that you're holding on to the fact that there are differences, and that yes, societal decisions about what's considered good or bad can lay on top of that. So, how do you handle this topic with children? Gently, and again, that position of we all have biases. As the exhibition does that, and we are working on a teacher's guide that includes posters, and you can utilize the website that Lenora was just talking about. Is the biasinsideus.si.edu. But gently, one, differences are real, and your preferences for someone who looks like you is natural. The point is, though, that we shouldn't allow you to think that that's all that the richness allows for you. As a child, allowing that to open up. So in our exhibition, again, I think it's a way to get at it. Let's peel back the skin and the sinew and show the fact that we're all human. And then let's allow the fact that biases are good. At the beginning, you know who to run away from and who to run toward. And then allow in the teaching of bias, that place where you will allow yourself to say, is it fair that just because this person looks this way, that they can't come into this place or do this thing? Is that fair? I think we can weave in issues of fairness and empathy, but gently. Because as Lenora has said, and it is true, our society comes at us in all sorts of ways, and biases are rivering through all of our whole world. And so giving children sight is a lovely, important thing, but let's not pretend that they're not in a society where this has all become really kind of hyper energized. So gently, I would say, but honestly. And I would indeed, in terms of kids, I really would direct you to some of the resources. Please come to Discovery Place. If you're in Charlotte, see that exhibition. It starts there. Do go to the website, the Smithsonian website, The Bias Inside Us. There's an online exhibition. And as Lenora has mentioned, there are also assets and resources there to assist you. And let's just be kind with each other. It won't be automatic overnight if these biases have inculcated deeply, just gently, and knowing that we can unhinge them, we can unclench it, we can change it. Our negative biases are not our destiny.
I love that. One other thing I'd say about young children is answering the questions as they're asked. So giving opportunities. I think this exhibit is an incredible opportunity for children to be around something that they may have some questions about, and then answering those questions. Sometimes we as adults can come in real heavy-handed, right, with more information maybe than was asked. But books also provide excellent opportunities for young students to learn even about history, and then let them ask questions and address the question that was asked. If that helps at all. I'm a grandmother of 5, so I'm navigating that challenge even now.
I think that's a great answer. Talk to them where they are, answer them where they are. That's wonderful. We don't have to overlay this with so much weight that becomes a chore. It should be natural. And if someone goes to the exhibition, my hopes are that you leave that exhibition with your eyes open, aware that the biases are real, and they can get in our way of seeing the beauty of our world and people in our world. and that you know that it is not a failing. You can be a very good person and have biases. We want you to know that from this exhibition. Ultimately, I believe in a world that we get along, where we get along as a culture, and with diversity. I think this is what the exhibition is really trying to say. We can indeed coexist positively without diversity.
Yeah. I think about, too, a world without barriers, right? Especially as we're thinking about ableism. A lot of things, what happens is we erect like literal barriers, right? To getting up onto a sidewalk, right? To accessing a building, to accessing a space. And we can think about that more broadly. Are there barriers? And how do we work to dismantle them together?
An amazing conversation, Marquette and Lenora. Thank you so much for talking with us today. You've given us a lot to think about, and evidenced by how great this conversation is, we are over time. So thank you again for your time and for your thoughts. Thank you to all of you who joined us this afternoon to listen and ask questions. Please use the link in the chat to give us feedback on this experience. Once again, the Bias Inside Us exhibition can be seen at Discovery Place Science through April 9th. And if you have not yet had a chance to see it, we hope you will come by and see it during museum hours or free of charge during our community access evenings on Thursday between 5:30 and 8:30. More information can be found on Discovery Place Science's website, science.discoveryplace.org. Also, if you'd like to share this program with anyone who was not able to attend today, the recording will be on YouTube immediately following the event. Thank you again. Have a great rest of your day.